Thank you. I also thank you very much for coming, everybody. I also want to thank the Hauenstein Center and the Seidman Center and this wonderful Fountain Street Church. This venue is awe-inspiring, and I can understand why so many of our distinguished predecessors over the years, Winston Churchill and the rest, would want to appear here. First of all, I want to say a special word about one of our hosts, Ralph Hauenstein, who has made so much of this possible. And I want to salute him not only because of his magnificent achievements and contributions, but also, frankly, to score a debating point. Ralph is a product of the Civilian Conservation Corps. What was the Civilian Conservation Corps? In the dark days of 1933, when all of the banks were closed, and Franklin Roosevelt became president when the country was literally curled up in the fetal position. The banking crisis had started right here in Michigan because of the dysfunctional relationship between Henry and Edsel Ford. Henry wouldn't bail out Edsel's bank. Governor Comstock of Michigan was forced to close the banks here. The disease spread across the country, and pretty soon our economy had melted down. The Board of Trade in Chicago closed indefinitely. New York Stock Exchange closed indefinitely. A lot of people thought that capitalism was at an end. Chairman of the Dean of the Harvard Business School was among those who thought that perhaps capitalism, as we knew it, was at an end. Nobody knew what was going to come next. Studebaker had a car called the Dictator, which sold rather well. Obviously, dictatorship in Europe at that time was working well. Mussolini was extraordinarily popular, not just in Italy, but in the United States. Hitler was brand new. Nobody quite realized he was a bad actor yet. So Franklin Roosevelt comes to power, and first he does something rather conservative. Like President Obama, he rejects the liberal idea of nationalizing the banks because he knows he needs to stabilize the banks first, and then he sets about putting people to work. And his first big work program, $1 a day, not popular with organized labor, was the CCC. What did the CCC accomplish? Planted 3 billion trees, saving the topsoil of the United States, put more than 2 million people to work, trained Ralph and his colleagues so that they could go on to serve as the officer corps that won World War II and saved humanity, led eventually to the integration of the armed forces, kicked off both the environmental movement in this country, the conservation movement, as well as the national service movement, since the CCC was the first national service program. Now, did the CCC end the Depression? Did all the other jobs programs end the Depression? No. Did all of them work? No. The National Recovery Act, as Amity indicated, was a failure. But if you believe, as Roosevelt did, in bold, persistent experimentation, you were going to try a lot of things to try to work the problem. And to confront the threat of a loss of our system, of our capitalist system and of our democratic system. Roosevelt decided not to become a dictator, to work through Congress, even though a lot of newspaper editorials were urging him to take dictatorial powers. So did it work? That's the question. And the answer is that we didn't get out of the Depression until World War II. So if you're asking, did it actually end the Depression? Did the New Deal end the Depression? The answer would be no. But I saw Senator Mitch McConnell on television recently, and he was saying he'd been doing some reading about the New Deal period. Perhaps he was reading Amity's book and some others. And he said he was arguing against stimulus programs. And he said that he found that history showed us that Roosevelt's stimulus, big government spending, that didn't get us out of the Depression. It was World War II that got us out of the Depression. Ha, 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 he was saying. It wasn't the New Deal. It wasn't those big spending programs. And I did something I probably shouldn't have. I started yelling a bit at the television. I said, what do you think World War II was? It was massive government spending, Keynesian economics on steroids that got us out of the Depression. That massive government spending is what brought us out. And you know, I don't know about you, but I think reducing unemployment from 25%, in Michigan it was over 30%, to a little bit over, 11, 12, 13%, more than, cutting it basically in half, I think that's pretty impressive. That doesn't sound like failure to me. Now, unemployment went up and down in the period, but the numbers that you might hear from Amity don't actually count the millions of people who were in government jobs programs. The statistics in those days didn't count them as being employed. So the numbers that you're going to hear from her on unemployment are artificially high. Now, at a certain point, they had another dip in 1937, and that was because in advance of the 1936 election, Roosevelt cut spending. He decided to try to appease the deficit hawks, moved away from the New Deal programs in order to get some votes, and the unemployment went back up to 19%. So it was when he got more conservative in his approach that the economy weakened. But I think the best judges of whether the New Deal did anything to improve the economy are the American people. We heard mention of Ronald Reagan in the debate. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago, he said. That was a line from Franklin Roosevelt. He asked people in a fireside chat, are you better off than you were 2 years ago, before the 1934 midterm elections? They responded with a resounding Democratic triumph. In the 1936 re-election, he carried all but 2 states, Maine and Vermont, the biggest victory since George Washington. Now, if he had been failing, if the Depression was not at least being ameliorated or eased, considerably eased, by the efforts of Franklin Roosevelt, with the American people, were they that easy to fool? I don't think the American people are stupid. I think they understand what's in their interest. And if you look at the long-term legacy of these New Deal programs, 39,000 schools built, 325 airports, 2,500 hospitals. This is a monumental contribution to the infrastructure of our country, and that made so much of our post-war prosperity possible. So the efforts of Franklin Roosevelt were flawed in many respects, but in total, they were a major, major contribution to the development of our country.